and it's October 6th, 2021. I've been on a hiatus for the last 5 weeks because of a COVID-19 infection that I got, and the week I had to spend in the hospital being treated rather robustly. That successfully worked, but it's left me in a very feeble and slow mentality. My nurses and my doctor and other friends have told me that it's only by the grace of God that I'm here, and that I survived the attack since I'm 92, and survival rate's not too primo at that age. So, in fact, my doctor called me a tough old bastard. So I guess he knew he knows something more than I do. The reason I got into Japan was because of their deliveries, basically. When I went to Dawson, the place was a mess, and the tooling was ancient and weak and worn out, and the molds, in many cases, incorporated electrical systems within the mold itself that were constantly failing and causing downtime and part shortages, never-ending issues. And of course they were worn out. So my boss gave me a blank check to do what I had to do to get the place straightened up and to get those tools up to modern production standards. I know what I just said sounds pompous and braggadocio, but in reality, configuration of these parts was so simple compared to the stuff that I made when I was at GE. And the years that I've been involved with plastics, and starting from the ground floor and learning the intricacies of the machines as well as the process, GE over the years made this job so simple and easy for me that it was almost comical. It enabled me to apply all the hands-on education I had in doing the very best work possible there. I was in a unique position with my background, and so I was a good find for the company. We made industrial containers. Products were beefy and strong, and they're used everywhere in industry. And so the demand was high too, and we were always under pressure because we were late with our deliveries because of the mold failure, and they had to be removed from the press, and mad overtime spent to get it back in shape to run again for a while. So it was a matter of urgency that the place be upgraded. I saw immediately what was wrong with tooling, so I redesigned the tools to incorporate modern techniques and materials and so forth. So I went out for quotes, and the quotations came back. There were very few, and the delivery times were outrageous. Even up to 3 years. That place didn't have 3 years to survive at the rate they were going. So my boss told me to do whatever I had to do. So I went to Japan and England and Italy for quotations. And I got responses, but the Japanese promised by far the quickest deliveries and the best prices. So I placed my first job there, and I placed one in England and one in Italy too as test samples, ones that I thought weren't as urgent. Japan promised less than 3 months delivery on it. So when the sample date came around, I went over there, and sure enough, they were ready to go when I got into the plant, and the samples came out looking very, very good, exceptionally good actually. And so that began my relationship with the Japanese. Now the one from England came in a little late, but I had approved shipment of it the way it was. I immediately had some failures, and so I had to have those done locally. And that delayed delivery, and the price wasn't as good either as Japan. The one from Italy was, quality-wise, all right. It wasn't exceptional, but it was acceptable. But it was a little late too, and the price again was a little higher than Japan. And so I just was overall more satisfied and confident with the Japanese. So I immediately began to place additional tools there, and over the next 2 or 3 years, I made at least 25 trips to Japan to prove the product before it was shipped. During these trips, I took Shirley with me a number of times, both to Japan and, of course, as I mentioned, to Italy and in England. And I enjoyed having her with me, but of course I couldn't do it every time. It was pretty expensive. In any case, I want to expand on the experiences that Shirley and I had in Japan. I might mention that a number of times I took her to Honolulu and she stayed there by herself while I went to Japan. And of course, when I came back, I stayed with her a day or two and we'd come back together. Which she really enjoyed. She was a gal that wasn't afraid of anything, and she wasn't afraid to stay in Honolulu by herself or Tokyo either, as I'll relate later on. She was outgoing and made friends everywhere, so I had no concerns about her being frightened or lost or anything like that. She was a very smart woman, and she knew her way around. Anyway, I'm going to proceed here with the story I want to tell. One time I was there, it was midwinter and pretty cold in Niigata. They're on the other side of the mountains. They don't get as much snow as they do in the mountains, but at Niigata they get 2 or 3 feet on the ground at a time. So the shop that I used primarily for my work in Japan is the one in Niigata. And this was a very nice, extremely well-equipped shop and capable of producing my molds, which were generally in the 15 to 25,000 pound range. One unique feature that he had was a room mounted on rubber. And so when you went in there, you took your shoes off and that's the vestibule, and you walked in there, and these jig boring machines or precision machining tools, large machines, 10, 12 feet high, and the operators would sit at the machine with earphones, and there was a microphone at the tool tip, and they could hear when the tool began to engage the steel. And of course these were very tiny tools and very, very precision. They could make stuff that was right on target. It was very impressive. The average age of the men working in that shop was 29, and they were skilled people. They knew their business. But anyway, he was a very active investor in other companies too, although he ran this company hands-on, but he had other interests, and one of them was in Hokkaido, which is an island to the north of the main island of Honshu, and he bought a furniture making company up there, and he needed to go up to review it or something. I don't know exactly. We were up there, and we flew up there, and I believe it was January, but boy, it was bitter cold. It was cold in Hokkaido. That's Siberian weather there. And we got there late in the afternoon and went to the hotel, and the room was barely heated. I put on every bit of clothing I had, 2 or 3 shirts and trousers and whatever I had, I put on. After spending a few minutes in the room putting on these extra clothes, we went to the factory. This was a large building, and they were making Paladin window frames and doors out of wood, and we went inside, and it was about 6 o'clock. It was just getting dark, and the shift ended at 6:30, so we didn't have a long time to see the operation in full stride. But these people were working in this cavernous building, and there wasn't any heat other than this huge cylinder, a steel cylinder in the middle of the factory, where they burned their scrap wood, and it was glowing red, but you got 20 or 30 feet away from it, and you didn't even know it was there. And these people were on the periphery of this monstrous heater and working in the bitter, bitter cold. They were really churning it out right to the last minute. They didn't stop working until 6:30 bell rang, and then they stopped. They didn't stop ahead of time and wait for the bell. They made some really, really unique window frames and doors. Very, very upper end stuff. But he decided he needed to stay there a couple of more days, so I didn't want to stay there. So I got on the plane, and actually I came back home from there. The snowfall was so deep there that the shrubbery would be crushed at some protective steps. So all the shrubs and the trees of smaller size, 10, 12 feet or so, all had like teepees built around, bear the weight of the snow and keep it from crushing and breaking off the branches and limbs from the shrubbery. Everyone did that. It was just a matter of whether you wanted to save your shrubs from being crushed or not. This picture shows me standing in front of the Olympic downhill skiing ramp. This was very impressive up close. I couldn't imagine how people can actually dare to come down such a vertical incline. These men that were working on it the day I was there were cleaning the surface and preparing it for some event that they were going to have in the near future. The people there were really friendly. The girls were friendly. It's really amazing how people are. But Japan is a very clean, unbelievably clean country. Everyone is clean. The cabs all have seat covers on top of the original upholstery material. The seat covers are what you've seen on your old cars or your dad's cars 50 years ago. On top of those seat covers are clear plastic, heavy vinyl seat covers. And on the doors, the side of the doors, the upholstery, that's all covered with this vinyl. The floor mats, the original floor mats from the factory are there, but they're also covered with another floor mat that covers quite a bit more of the floor than the factory ones do. And every time the cab driver has a moment, and I mean, he doesn't miss many, where he's waiting for a customer or something, he gets out and he's got a long duster, feather duster, about 4 feet long or so with feathers, and he goes over the whole car and dusts it down, and of course the cabs are spotlessly clean. But they work every day keeping us clean. The only problem is though that those heavy vinyl covers are sticky when it gets hot, and it gets very hot in Japan. Offices where the clients are met all have sofas. There's always a room set aside for clients to sit and have a conference and whatever. And these sofas and chairs are covered with this heavy vinyl, and it really gets sticky. And I remember being over there one day, and it was 40 degrees Celsius, which means well over 100. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was considerably hot and sticky. And this factory building was set in a valley on a level ground, and surrounding right up to the footers of the foundation of this factory were rice paddies. The water lapped against the footers of the building. The front of the building obviously had access to the front door pavement, but the two sides and the rear had water lapping against it. The rice at that time was coming out of the water a few inches. Oh, and it was hot. The meeting room there at that factory was on a mezzanine. You had to climb up a winding metal flight of stairs to get up there, and it was right under the roof, obviously. And we went in that room, and there was an air conditioner in the window, and it of course wasn't running. He went over and he pulled the chain. It was a chain start electrical switch, and that thing started, and you could barely hear it. It was a small capacity air conditioner in this amazingly hot, sticky room. We were in there, we reviewed the blueprints and specifications and so forth, but I remember that I was just drenched when I came out of there, and that poor old air conditioner was just thumping away, and it might as well committed suicide is try to cool that room. They took me around, showed me every temple and praying spot and holy place. Oh, I was booted out, or Buddha did out. Actually, that's not the religion, though. Oh, I forget what it is. There are some Catholic churches in Japan. In Tokyo, I always managed, if I was there on Sunday, I always managed to find a Franciscan chapel where most of the Christians in Tokyo went. So they had a pretty good crowd. It was in a different section of Tokyo, but all you need to do when you're in a place like that is get a map of the subways, and you can get around. It's not a problem. I never found it a problem. When I started going to Niigata, the representative would meet me at the airport and drive me up to Niigata. Well, I made several trips, and I was late. No, my plane was early by an hour or two, and I had no way of contacting him when there wasn't any cell phones or anything in those days. So when I got off the airplane, I found my way to Tokyo, the railroad station there, and I couldn't speak Japanese, and this clerk couldn't speak any English either. But I wrote down Niigata, I just spelled it out on a piece of paper, and I gave it to him, and I pointed to it, and he understood right away why I needed a ticket to Niigata. So I bought the ticket, and I figured out how to catch it. This is a big terminal, thousands of people in there every minute, and so I caught the train, rode up, it was 4 or 5 hours up there, and they had gone to the airport. I'd already left the airport before they arrived, so they got to the airport and they found out that my plane had come in so much earlier. They figured that I was out in the sea of humanity there somewhere. They couldn't believe I'd found my way through all of that to get up there. One time I went to Hiroshima, which was one of the cities. Nagasaki was the other that were bombed were destroyed in 1945 by atomic bombs that we dropped on them. And I met a man there who I had some interest in perhaps using him for a job, but that part of it didn't work out. But we got into a friendly conversation, and I asked him what he thought about the atomic bombs being dropped on Japan. He told me that on that morning he was 8 years old, and Nagasaki was being cleared for fire control. They knew that Tokyo and the other cities had been bombed, had burned like matchsticks because of their construction and closely fitted houses that were made out of bamboo and so forth. So they were clearing large swaths of housing and buildings so that they'd be able to control the fire and it wouldn't just run outrageously over the whole city if that situation arose. And he said on that morning he was on his way to work, even though he's only 8 years old. Everyone had to help, and his part of the work was to drag wood and pieces of housing that had been bulldozed into piles and whatever. He heard the air raid siren go off about 8 o'clock, and of course everybody was alert to it, but it was just a single plane flying over, and it happened to be the lead plane for the Enola Gay that did the job. So about 15 minutes later, he heard the sirens go off again. So he was near a culvert under a street. So he dove into that. They'd been trained to do that in case of air raids. So he crawled into that culvert pretty far in, and the bomb dropped about a mile away from where he was at. And he said that he stayed in there until the black rain quit. Apparently the disturbance of the atmosphere and the dirt in the air created this black rain, and it was radioactive too. But he crawled out and he saw the destruction and everything, but he was completely unharmed. And subsequently they offered him free hospital care the rest of his life. if he would come periodically for an examination. And he's never suffered any ill effects from it. I asked him what he thought about the idea, or the bombing and its effect on Japan long term. And he thought about it for a minute, and he said, it's probably the best thing that could have happened in the circumstances, because we were equipped and we were being trained to resist the invasion with every piece of steel or wood that we had. If you had a pitchfork, you were trained in how to fork a soldier with the tangs of it. And he said, even I was only 8 years old, but I was trained to do some things to resist, and the whole country would have resisted. And that would have resulted in millions and millions of deaths on both sides. Of course, we would have lost more than the invaders would have, but the invaders would have suffered horribly. So at least it ended it all, and the leaders that were heading the war in our country were deposed, and the emperor accepted the surrender. So it really turned out in the long term to be far better than any other alternative that he could think of. Shirley and I stopped at Waikiki or Honolulu several times together, and I stopped there a few times on my trip to Japan. On one of my trips, I took Shirley with me to Honolulu and dropped her off there. And she stayed there about a week. And then our oldest daughter, who we lost about 10 years ago, joined her there. And unfortunately, they were there the week that Honolulu has their winter. And the cold, windy, and rainy few days really interfered with their activities. But they went to see Don Ho and other sites in Honolulu, so they had a good time. But unfortunately, the weather wasn't that nice, or it wasn't normal. I stopped there so many times that I got to the point where I didn't even leave the airport. I'd just stay at the Holiday Inn at the airport and lay over and catch my connecting flight to Tokyo. So it long lost its luster. These pictures show Shirley in her glory, enjoying the beautiful climate and it's a beautiful place. One night we decided to stay in the Royal Hawaiian. The Royal Hawaiian Hotel was an old hotel there, built sometime in the 20s, and the hotel where Shirley's uncle, who was the bandmaster on the West Virginia, and of course it was sunk there on December 7th, 1941. And his 18-piece band had no place to play, and they then were assigned to permanent duty in the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, and they entertained troops all during the war. So we decided to stay there one night just to see what kind of a place it was. It was a nice hotel, but it was definitely dated, and the air conditioning wasn't very quiet, and I preferred the newer hotel where we stayed. We stayed at the Surfrider Hotel right along the beach. We stepped out the back door of the hotel right onto the beach, so it was a pretty nice spot. We were in a car and drove all over the island, and one site there in Honolulu that was sobering was the USS Arizona Memorial that's built out into the harbor over and straddles the hulk of the Arizona that's sitting on the bottom. She was hit by a bomb that tore her insides out, and she sank immediately there. So damaged, they were unable to raise her and repair her. Most of the ships that were sunk were raised and saw many years of action in the Pacific after Pearl Harbor, but the Arizona was left to lie on the bottom. And I remember the first time I was there by myself, I had a camera, and I went out there, and I stood over the deck and looked down, and I could see oil coming out of the ship from one of the tanks trapped beneath the ocean. And I took a picture of it, and it was iridescent on the water. That oil seeped. It may still be seeping out of the huge tanks that were filled and trapped beneath the ocean. and slowly leaking back to the surface. I don't recall the number of men trapped there, but I think it's around 1,300, and their bones still lie inside the ship. Charlie's uncle was the bandmaster on a West Virginia that was sunk there. And since his ship was sunk and they had no place to play, they were assigned to the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. Uncle Jerry barely escaped with his life that day. He was preparing to go on deck and begin the Sunday morning service music. And quite a number of his band was already up there tuning their instruments and preparing when the Japanese bomb hit at about 8:15 in the morning. And Jerry was trapped below decks, and as the ship rolled over or sank under the water filled the compartment where he was at, and of course the power went off, so he was left in total darkness. But he kept his cool and felt his way over to the door and got through the door and eventually escaped through the wreckage. 3 of his band members were killed on the deck there, and several wounded. His band played big band music that was typical of that era, and other big bands would come to visit there and entertain the troops. And one of them was Tommy Dorsey, who was very popular in those days too. And they took turns leading each other's bands, but Uncle Jerry's band was just as good as anything that I ever heard. They really made beautiful music, and they were so expert at it that it was really amazing. While they were stationed there, they made a metal record at the radio station there in Honolulu. This metal record was a master, normally made to make impressions on plastic and reproduce them by the thousands. But Jerry's record was never reproduced, but he made tapes of them, of the music that they played and recorded on there. And I have a tape of that record. It's really beautiful music. Not popular today, but it was certainly big time then. I'm going to play a little portion of the music that Jerry originally recorded on the metal disc in Honolulu in 1942. In 1985, the hard disc was transcribed to cassette tapes, and I got a copy of that cassette tape in 1986. And in 2006, my son Jerry transcribed from the cassette tape to a CD. And tonight, in 2023, I'm transcribing from my computer and the CD in the computer via the loudspeakers on my computer to my video camera, which is recording the sound that you're hearing. And then, of course, from my video camera into the computer and onto this thumb drive that you're listening this from. So it's had around 5 transpositions through probably the most questionable media is the one that I've used tonight on transcribing from the speakers on my computer to the microphone on my camera. That's a link that's awfully weak and loses a lot of information and data, but it's good enough to give you an inkling of the kind of music. And the music that's you're listening to was popular in the 30s. It was gradually transitioning from the popular music of the 20s, which is, there's quite a difference in those two, and then there's quite a difference in the 30s music and the 40s and 50s music. So Jerry was still playing arrangements from the 30s on this demonstration. So I hope you get an idea, though. Perhaps you'll get a tiny inkling of the work and the skill behind the music that you're hearing. It's well arranged and orchestrated and practiced to the eyeballs. So in real life, it's got quality. And as I mentioned, some of the ringleaders or the kings of the music era in the time of the early 40s and 50s led Jerry's orchestra, and he led theirs. So they were working on a very excellent level of music. I'm going to end this one here and we'll go to the next one for more Japanese fun and games. On one of my trips to Japan, I decided to lay over in Anchorage for a day or two and see the damage from the earthquake that happened just a few years before that. They had a 7 point something earthquake that essentially destroyed Anchorage. The main street split, and the theaters and the marquee on the theaters sank to the level of the sidewalks, flush against the sidewalk, as this picture shows. And much damage still existed there. And then I walked through this town and took some pictures, and I realized then that my plans back in 1947 to come to Anchorage, their impossibility at the time, was a blessing in disguise. The time I stayed there overnight or a day or whatever it was in the fall or November, and the sunlight only shone about 4 or 5 hours during the day, so it was dark a good percentage of the time, which is a depressing atmosphere to have day after day, month after month. One day there at lunchtime, I was sitting in a restaurant called the Copper Kettle, and they served only soups. They had 3 kinds of soup that they made the day before and left it marinate overnight for sale the next day. A very, very premium soup, very delicious. I heard this rumble, and it sounded like a large semi truck passing. And I thought it was a little bit odd, but and then when the chandeliers and the other stuff in there started to shake and jump around, that caught my attention. But the thing that really caught my attention was when people started to scream and run for the door, and this thing was an earthquake, and it was as I recall, it was a 5.8 or something of that nature. It was a fairly strong quake, but the natives there were highly sensitized to earthquakes, and certainly had not forgotten that it happened in 1964 and literally demolished Anchorage. The tsunami that was created by that earthquake generated 20-story high waves and demolished the many miles of coastline and thousands of buildings and subdivisions along the route, where the ground subsided enormously.